Okay. I think this is recording. We don't have a mic. Last time I was just like yelling.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey Samar, I posted it in the core staff channel. If you want to like put it up, you also. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Cool. Also, you can chill until it's your part. I'll let you know. Yeah. We'll do like a 5-minute break if you can. Thank you. Peace out. All right, everyone, we're probably about to get started. Okay, so welcome back. For some of my lectures, I'm just gonna, at the beginning, kind of like rephrase this whole process and like where we are in our learning, right? So over the last few lectures, we went over HTML and CSS, and now we're kind of in the last stage of this like trifecta of things you need to know before you get into more complicated stuff. So the reason I want to show you guys this is because I took this decal last semester, and here I am this semester. I'm teaching it. I'm like working on a lot of projects. And I think once you guys like can see the bigger picture of what you're learning, it might make it a lot more fun, and it might like encourage you guys more to like really dive deep into what you're doing. So these 3 things that we're working on right now are basically just the solid foundations of like what you're going to be using when you're going forward and like building your own websites. So today's lecture is all about JavaScript. This is JavaScript 1. We're gonna have JavaScript 2 and 3, and it's gonna be taught by me and Josh. And just before we get into it, a quick little fact for you guys: over 97% of websites out there use JavaScript. So before you're like, what is JavaScript? What is this thing that we're doing? Like, why is it necessary? Just know it's a very like solid fundamental component of building websites, which is why we're teaching it. And this lecture also is designed to give you an introduction to JavaScript. So many of you guys out here might be like computer science majors, data science majors. You guys already done like Python or like Java or other types of like programming languages. If you have, the thing to pay attention in JavaScript is less about like what we're teaching you in terms of like if statements, for loops, while loops, stuff like that, and more just pay attention to the syntax. So for those of you who are like really familiar with already like some programming languages, this might be more chill for you. For others out there who are like just getting started into programming, or maybe this is like your first programming language, I'm going to try my best to kind of explain it from the beginning. If you have more questions, like feel free to ask them, like don't be shy. And also in the course content, like materials, you guys can go through that as well on your own time. And there's a lot of readings out there on our website of just like how to navigate getting started. But I'm going to do my best to kind of like slice it right in the middle. So it's not like too boring for those of you who already know programming, and it's not like too heavy for those of you who have never seen a programming language before. So my first question is like, what is code, right? Interestingly enough, the first thing we think about with code is it's first for humans and then for computers. And code we can think of as just notes on how to solve a particular problem that just happens to be in a way that a computer can understand it. So this is really important because later when you get into like a lot of projects and you're working with a bunch of people, you're gonna have to show your code to like many different people. Many people are gonna read your code. You're gonna have to come back and read your code later. And there's a million different ways to solve one problem. So readability is a big thing, and you guys have to make sure that you're thinking about this principle when you're writing your program and like when you're programming going forward, right? You guys got to think about, you know, how am I going to see this later, and how are my peers going to see this, and just making sure everything's readable. So starting off with that, I'm going to give you your first little bit of JavaScript code. So as you guys can see here, this is, for those of you that understand like Python, it's something, it's very similar to that. And there's also notes in the content about how it's related. But if you look at something here, I'm just going to explain like the very basics of JavaScript. Essentially, we're declaring some variable monthly rent. And then we're also doing some yearly rent here. And we're multiplying monthly rent by 12. If you guys don't know what const means, it's basically just like how to define a variable. In JavaScript, we just have like const and var. Those intricacies will be like explained in later lectures. All you guys got to know right now is we're making some kind of variable, we're storing some data in it, and we're doing something to that variable. The console.log here is basically, if you guys know Java, it's like console.out.println or whatever. And in Python, it's just like your print function. And basically, this will print to your terminal whatever the output is of this program. So right here, what we're doing is we're taking some monthly rent, we're multiplying it by 12, and we're printing it out. This, you guys don't have to understand completely. I promise I'll break it down for you as we go through this lecture. So here's a demo. Your first demo on this section. And you guys don't need to follow along this demo. There will be a demo later in this lecture where you guys are going to follow along every single bit. But this part is just for you guys to like really see the power of JavaScript behind a website. So let's say I'm starting off with this type of like HTML code, right? Well, you guys have all seen this before. I'm basically just like, I have some HTML here and I'm saying like, there's some JavaScript experiments. I have a header tag, which is JavaScript experiment. And then I have some script tag here on the bottom. And essentially how we insert JavaScript into our website is we're going to put a script tag at the bottom of every body. And our HTML is going to understand, oh, hey, we have this script tag. It's pointing us to some JavaScript that's going to be doing something to our website. So this is the way that we're communicating to our website that we have some JavaScript that it needs to look at. It's the same way that we did our CSS style sheets, except this time it's just with JavaScript. So let me open up what this page looks like. Let me hide this real quick. So boom, we've seen this all before. This is just like your classic H1 tag. And now a cool thing you guys have probably already done to like trick your friends into thinking you got like 100 on that 601A midterm, but like probably got a 50 like me, no shame if you did. You can right click on your page. You click inspect, scroll this over. Ooh. And Chrome actually has a built-in interpreter for your JavaScript code. So when you're going through and you're building your websites, you can actually use this inspector to understand what's going on behind the scenes. I won't dive into everything that's happening on here, but you guys can like browse on your own, right? Once you like click inspect, you can see all the elements of like what's going on here. You can see, you know, this element here. If I click on this guy and I go here, I can notice that it tells me, hey, this is some H1 tag. Its color is black. Its font is this. Its margin is this. And if you guys are ever like looking through a website, you guys can just like scroll through the HTML and like you guys can really start to understand like what are the workings of a website that you've seen before. But the cool thing about this with JavaScript is in the demo I just showed you guys with the monthly rent, I have that script here in experiment.js, right? I have my monthly rent and then I'm calculating yearly rent based on monthly rent and I'm multiplying by 12. And I'm saying like print this yearly rent to some terminal. And when my website runs in Chrome, if I look into the console, you can see here that it prints 6,000. Can you guys all see that, by the way? Yeah, it automatically prints 6,000 to the console. So when you guys are testing your JavaScript and you're putting it into your HTML, using your console is a good way to test out the code that's actually running. And this is where you're also going to see where your code fails. So if you have any errors or any bugs in your code, it's going to show up also in the console. So this is like an important thing for debugging if you don't want to run through everything through the terminal. And also it's like a good way to like see your website and interact with it at the same time. Later, when you guys build out like really complex websites with a lot of like JavaScript behind it, you guys are going to be able to like see everything step by step in this console and like print a whole bunch of stuff to just test out the status of your website and what's going on here. So that was a lot of stuff. Are there any like questions before we dive into a little deeper? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you guys know how with the CSS, when we were like linking it to our websites, we were putting it in the head. And basically that was like letting our website know that we have like some style sheets that's going to be like governing this website. So we're essentially doing that with JavaScript, except instead we're using it with script tag and we're putting it at the end of body. So this is just letting our website know that, hey, there's some JavaScript you need to look out for. And we're mentioning where to find that JavaScript. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. We'll go back to the slides. So that was just an overview. And here is now a detailed JavaScript introduction. So we start off with something called statements. So we use statements to declare and initialize variables. So with JavaScript, only one thing is ever happening at a time. So if you look at a big, like huge chunk of code, don't be worried. Essentially, JavaScript is single threaded. You guys need to know what this means, but essentially only one thing is ever being processed at one time. So as you're going through your code, just look line by line. For those of you who are like beginners in programming, you don't have to understand everything up front. Just go line by line and try and understand and break down the code with each little segment. So let's start off with a very, very simple example. So here we're declaring 3 variables. And the way we declare variables in JavaScript is with this var keyword. And so we're saying var x equals 5. So we're declaring some variable x and we're initializing it to some number value 5. We're doing the same thing with y and we're setting it to 6. And then we're saying variable z equals x plus y. So here we've already introduced some basic operation that JavaScript is able to perform. You can see that we have some variable x, some variable y, and some variable z that's finding the values of x and y, summing them up, and then obviously the value of z is anyone. Come on, I know you guys. Someone tell me. Just shout it out. What is it? What is z? Thank you. Good stuff. Okay. Go Berkeley. Syntax and convention. So commenting out code, we commented out with the double forward slash. In CSS, if you guys remember, it was the forward slash and the asterisk, followed by like an asterisk and I think a backslash or another forward slash. We always end statements with semicolons. And just for naming conventions, Python uses like underscores to name variables, whereas JavaScript uses camel cases. So here's an example of like what a Python variable would look like. Python's going to say this is a Python variable. You have like a bunch of underscores. If you guys were in 61A, you guys had like a bunch of underscores and all your like functions and your variable names. And then in JavaScript, you use camel case, which is essentially you start off in lowercase and then it's like a camel. You kind of like humps in between your words. Are there any questions on anything that I just covered this far? Okay. No. Cool. Types. So we have a few different types in JavaScript. We have numbers, and essentially numbers just represent like integers, floats. JavaScript doesn't differentiate between types of numbers. It just has like one number type, which is like very simple and easy for our convenience. So as you guys can see here, this is exactly the same demo I showed you guys last time, except this time we're doing number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. And the same type of operation we're doing with number 4 on the previous 3 numbers. Cool. And also, just so you guys know, in like an earlier demo, I showed you guys const. But for now, just initialize and declare all your variables with var. In lecture 3, I believe we're going to be going over the main differences in terms of the scope, which you guys don't need to know right now, with these different types of variables. But just for now, it's very plain and simple. It's like Python. You just like, except you have to actually add a keyword. and it automatically assumes what type you're giving it. And you can always like override that variable. Later, we'll get into like some more intricacies with that. But for now, you can just declare all your variables with var. It's very easy and very chill. Another type we have is strings. So strings you can think of as a string of one-letter characters. So if you have a bunch of these characters, you put them all together into kind of a string. That's the type that we store into variables in JavaScript. We can use double quotes or single quotes, and we can connect strings through concatenation, which I'll show in just a second. And another interesting thing that we can do with strings is we can use this like $sign with these curly braces to insert some value into a string. So I'll show you guys what that looks like in a second. So let's say we have this piece of code here, and I'm saying variable first name is Emir, variable last name is Karabeg, and we're doing a sentence, and we're concatenating my first name and my last name into an entire sentence. So we're saying sentence, hello plus first name plus little quotations to like make a little space plus last name, and then some ending statement, which is like, how are you? We can perform the exact same concatenation or like statement rather with adding these like $signs with values. And basically what this does is just like you can do it either way. And there's no like really correct way to do this, but this is just like a very easy and like candy syntax that JavaScript uses. So you guys don't have to make like all these plus signs in your statements. If you want, you can kind of use this like backtick quotation. And then when you're typing in your string, you can just, if you want to add in a variable value in there, you can do a $sign, enter in some value in between or some variable name in between curly braces, and then continue on with your string without having to add like plus signs. So the reason why this is useful is like, as you guys can see, I console.log both of these, and you can see at the bottom of my screen, they print out the same thing. So the reason why this is useful is just so like you guys don't have to keep track of like all these like plus signs, and your code kind of like looks really messy. It looks really clean in the second version. In the first version, it's like whatever. I mean, it's not really that big of a difference. You guys can use both of them, but I guess it just looks nicer the second way. Are there any questions on strings or numbers? Yes? You can, yeah, that's a great question. I think you can put any type in there you want. It'll always convert to like the value. So that's the thing. If I put like first name here without the $sign and the curly braces, it would just say first name, obviously. But because we did it, it'll convert anything. I think an integer would work as well too. Almost 100% sure. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. I believe the last type we're getting into in this section are Booleans. So if you guys know what Booleans are, I've taken like another CS class. It's basically, you can think of a bool as a type that's a light switch. So it either has two properties, 0 or 1, or true or false. So looking at this example here, we have some variable trueValue, and we're setting it to true, and some variable falseValue, and we set it to false. I guess the only thing important to note here for people that have seen this type of code before is that the true and the false are lowercase. And one thing we can do here with a variable is we can perform some operation, the not operation on it, to give it the opposite value. So if I'm trying to initialize some variable called true false, and I'm taking the true value and I'm negating it, I put some exclamation mark in the front, and then therefore, if I console.log it, it's going to print false. I'm going to show you guys some more operations in just a second, but this is a mini operation you guys can do with Booleans to flip the value of it. Are there any questions on Booleans? Nothing. Okay, cool. Operators. So let's say I'm trying to track friends at a party, and I show up to a party and there's like 0 people there. And I'm looking around, I'm like, this is pretty boring. So then I'm going to do a first type of operation, which I'm going to do friends at a party equals friends at a party plus 1. We've seen this all before, hopefully. And basically what this is saying is I'm taking this variable friends at a party, and then I'm adding 1 to it by just equaling it to myself plus 1. So I'm going to have 1 friend at the party, which is pretty cool. I can also plus equals 1. And now I'm going to have 2 friends at the party. I can also do friends at the party plus plus. If you guys have seen this in like for loops before, it's a pretty common thing. You can do plus plus. Now you have 3 friends at the party. And also like a weird thing you can do with JavaScript, which honestly I didn't know until recently, is you can do plus plus at the beginning. These are all just ways to do the same thing. Again, none of them are correct. I'm showing you guys a million ways to do the same thing, but you guys can pick and choose what you want to do. So now if I console.log friends at the party, I have 4 friends at the party, and it's pretty lit. Cool. Now we're going to get into comparisons and logical operators. So this is a slide you guys can reference back when you're like looking into your things later. To be honest, even I like sometimes forget the differences between like some of these operators, but here's like a quick reference for you guys. And you guys can also read about this in the notes. But basically we have equals to, equal value and equal type, which I'll show the difference in just a second. Not equals to, and then not equal to, nor equal type, and then greater than, less than equal to, greater than equal to. Yeah, you have a question? Yeah, exactly. I'll show it right here. So basically, let's say we have a variable x that's equal to 5. And then we're testing is x equals to 10. Obviously, it's going to be false because 5 is not 10. And then we're going to say is x equals to 5. That's true because 5 is 5. But then this is kind of weird in JavaScript. You can see 5 equals quotation marks 5. It's actually going to print true. So this is pretty interesting. JavaScript can tell the value inside this string. So even though they're not the same type, x, var x, I just explained was a number. And now we're just equating it to this string, but it still comes out to true. So this is something when using the equal signs, you guys have to watch out for. In other languages, you're going to use equals. But in JavaScript, if you want to compare the value and also the type, you have to use this triple equal sign. So you guys can see at this bottom part, we're saying x equals 5. That's true. But x triple equals string 5 is going to be false because it's comparing the type and the value. And even though the values are the same, it's saying, are you a number? And then the string 5 is like, nah, I'm a string. And then they don't vibe anymore. And then you guys can see the not equals over here. So the x does not equal 5. That's going to come out to false. And the reason for that is because x is 5. And we're saying, is x not equal to 5? And we're saying, no, it's equal to 5 because we do this like dumb equal sign. So JavaScript is like, yeah, we're the same because he's a 5 and I'm a 5, even though he's a different type. But if we do not equals with a double equal sign after, you can see that it's actually going to do it correct this time around. So we're saying x not equals 5. That's false because 5 is 5. But then if we do it with the string 5, that's going to be true because they're not equal, because we just compared the type and the value to each other. And then again, for x not equals to 10, that's going to be true, obviously, because 5 is not 10. Are there any questions about these types of operators or anything at all that we've just covered that you have a question about before? Yes. Yeah, for you mean like this? Like 5, like what? Sorry. Yeah. Oh, you mean like literally spelled out? I don't think it would. Yeah. In that case, it wouldn't. I think only if you put an integer value inside of a string, then I don't think JavaScript is that smart. Yeah. You have a question? Yeah. So if it has an operation inside of the string, I don't think that it would perform the operation. So in that case, I think it wouldn't be true. I think if you had some operation inside, that's a good question. Honestly, you can test it out, but my gut feeling is that it's not going to perform the operation. I think it just has to be the value itself. But you can test it out. Are there any questions? Yeah. What? This? You're asking about this one? It's basically saying because is 5 not equal to the string 5? And so the reason why this is true but this is false is because this is comparing the type and the number. So it's saying, is 5 not equal to? So basically it's saying that 5 is equal to the string 5 because we're doing like the dumb equal sign. But this is like the smart equal sign. So it's testing like, are we the same? And we are the same type. So that's why it's saying if it's not equal to, then we're going to print out true because it's not equal to, because 5 isn't equal to the string 5. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Any other questions? You guys don't have to be shy. Anything? Okay, cool. All good questions, by the way. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to talk about control flow. So we just talked about how to initialize variables. So we went through, the different types of variables we can initialize. We all initialize them with var. So you guys don't have to really keep track of them. It's just for you to know what operations you're applying to these variables. That comes in handy, knowing which variable type you're working with. But we want to do some more complicated things now. We don't just want to add 5 to 5. We want to like make a program now really work with like if statements and for loops and all these like crazy things you hear about in CS that sound cool. So we're gonna talk about if statements. So this is the first level of controlling the flow in some type of program. We're gonna say if some statement is true, do something. So what this means is basically we have some statement in this parentheses. If this statement has a Boolean value of true, if we perform some kind of operation in this statement and it returns some true value, then we're going to do something. If it doesn't, we're going to skip over this whole block and we're going to go to this else if statement. So else if, keep in mind the syntax here, this second statement, and then the same thing. If this evaluates a true, do something. But if these two don't evaluate to anything, else do this thing. And this do something is going to do something. So we'll see an example of it right now. So let's say we have some variable, sky is blue, and we're setting it to true. And then we're saying if sky is blue, which is going to give us some true value because we already set it to true. So the program is going to look at sky is blue, and it's going to say, okay, where is sky is blue in the program? It's going to look above it because it goes line by line. And we're saying, okay, the most recent instance of sky is blue, the value of that is true. So therefore, we're going to return a true value into this block, and then we're going to console.log the sky is blue. So if I ran this program, it's going to say the sky is blue, and then we're going to do some else statement that's going to say the sky is not blue in case sky is blue is equal to false. Let's look at a little more interesting example where we perform an operation inside of this if statement. So we're going to say if 2 plus 2, we're using the triple equals here, 4, then we're going to say console.log, thank God the fundamental principles of mathematics still hold true. Else we have some issues and we should probably all run for our lives. While loops. So now we just talked about how to kind of direct the flow of a program in a certain direction using if statements. But let's say now I want to do something a repeated amount of times. So for instance, we're going to look back at that example of like friends at a party, right? And last time it was like a pretty like annoying example. We had to like iterate like plus every single time we wanted to add a friend at a party. But let's say we just want to like show up to a party, run some for loop, and then like 10 friends show up, right? That's going to be pretty cool. So while loops, you guys can think of this like if you ever think about why would I ever use a while loop? If you're asking yourself the question or like you want to do something, you're saying I want to loop through something until some terminal condition. You don't really know when it's going to end, but you just want to like do something a certain amount of times until some condition. That's when you know you need to use a while loop. So we're looking back at the friends at the party. So we're saying variable friends at the party, we're initializing friends at the party to 0. And I'm saying while friends at the party is less than 10, and then I'm using this operator that we first defined earlier, which is friends at the party equals friends at the party plus 1. So basically what this is going to do is this while loop is going to enter, and then we're going to check value of friends at the party. So friends at the party, when we first set it, is going to be 0. So it's less than 10. That's true, right? So we get into this block. It's the same thing as an if statement. We basically look inside these parentheses. If that operation or like whatever kind of logic we're putting inside of this parentheses is true, then we're going to execute whatever follows after it. So we're saying friends at the party equals friends at your party plus 1. So now we're taking friends at the party, which is a value of 0. We're adding 1 to it. And now we have one friend at the party, which is pretty cool. And then it goes through again. So we go back into the while loop and we're saying, okay, now friends at the party is 1, which is less than 10, which is true. So we're going to iterate one more time. We're going to go all the way up until friends at the party equals friends at your party, which evaluates to 9 plus 1. And we're going to go back into the while loop and we're going to say friends at your party is 10. Is 10 less than 10? No. So let's exit out of this while loop and then we're going to console.log friends at the party, which is 10. So we got 10 friends at the party. It's an even more lit party than last time. So we're going somewhere. For loops. We have any questions on while loops, by the way? Or if statements? Because I don't think anyone asked a question on if statements. Questions? Nothing? Okay, cool. So for loops, you guys want to think of it as like, I want to loop through something X number of times. So notice that like in the while loop, we didn't know when this terminal, like we didn't know how many times we wanted to do it. We just knew like we wanted to do it until something, until we have 10 friends at the party. Maybe like, you know, the neighbors are going to get loud if there's like neighbors going to get annoyed if there's like more than 10 people there, right? So we just know we want less than 10 people. We don't care how we get there, just get us to 10 people. For loop is a little bit different. You're like, I know I want this operation to happen X number of times. So that's when you're going to use a for loop. So we're going to say this variable friends at your party, we're doing the same thing again. And we know we only want 10 people at the party. So we're setting it to 0. So notice the syntax here. We're declaring some variable I. Again, let we can replace with variable. We'll explain those differences later. But for now, you guys can just use var for everything. So we can say var friends at the party, var I equals 0. I is less than 10, and then I plus plus. This is the operator I was talking about a little bit earlier. And then as we go through, it's going to say friends at your party plus plus. It's the same idea with the while loop. Now we just give it some extra variable, and we're counting through this for loop a certain amount of times. So the first time this variable I is equal to 0, and we're going to say friends at the party plus plus. So now friends at the party is 1. We're going to go 2, 3, 4, all the way to 9. Then we go through friends at the party plus plus. Now I is equal to 10. Now is 10 less than 10? No. So we exit out of this, console.log friends at the party. We have another party of 10 people. Neighbors are happy. Good stuff. Any questions about control flow, types, intro to JavaScript? What is code? What is life? Nothing. Any questions? Okay, cool. I'm glad we all got it. And also, like, if you're ever confused on like any of these topics at all, if this is like your first intro to like computer science, please like also read through the notes. It's like super, super helpful. And if you guys ever like want to reference these slides, they're posted on Piazza. Or if you guys want to look through like the content on our website, if you're like going through some code later and are like looking back at it and you want to like understand some more stuff, just be sure to like check through our resources. We have everything posted for you guys later when you guys are coming back to this and like working on it. And again, as I mentioned, JavaScript is like super important for everything. Like when you're developing websites, you're using a bunch of JavaScript or like another version of it in like TypeScript. So yeah, it's all important stuff. Now we'll get into functions. So functions we use, we build functions to reuse useful pieces of code. So let's say I wanted a function to add 2 to some number. So notice the syntax here again. I'm using the keyword function and I'm giving it this function a name. I'm saying add 2, and we're expecting some parameter. You don't have to give it a type that you're expecting. We just know we're expecting some parameter number. Some variable is going to be passed in here, and we're going to call it number, and then we're going to return number plus 2. So then we're going to initialize this final answer variable, and we're going to say add 2, and we're passing in the number 5. So when we call add 2, we're passing in this number 5. So our code looks at anything above it. It says, okay, where's add 2 in our program? It looks at the like closest instance of add 2, and it's saying, okay, function add 2, we're expecting some number. The number passed in is 5. So we're returning 5 plus 2. So we're going to return 7. So then 7 is stored inside this final answer, and we're going to console.log final answer. And if we run this program, it's going to give us 7. Cool. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So in a function, when you return something, essentially when you run that function, it's just gonna return that return value back to whoever called it. But console is basically just console.log is printing it, is printing whatever you want to print to your terminal. So if I really wanted to, we could put here console.log number plus 2 instead of return number plus 2. The only reason we're doing return is because we are giving some value back to whatever called us, which we can store inside of something. So if I said variable final answer equals add 2 of 5, and this said console.log number plus 2, final answer wouldn't be set to anything because the function add 2 isn't returning any value to it. So if we do console.log in this function, we could do that, but we just couldn't assign, we couldn't initialize some variable with that function because it's not returning any value. This way, we're returning some value, we're storing it in final answer, and then we're printing that final answer. Does that make sense? I'll give another example of when we use both actually in the demo at the end of this lecture. Cool. So let's do this function greet. So this is a little more complex example where we're setting multiple parameters in one function. So we're saying some function greet, we're saying greeting, a first name, a last name, and let's say that we're writing this program for a company that is manages like hotels or like resorts, and they're saying like we want some website and we want people to put in their name and their last name, and we're gonna like put in some greeting, and then we're gonna greet all our users in our email with this, right? So we're creating some function greet. We have 3 parameters, and we're returning a string to them that we're then gonna display to the user when they come to our website. So we're saying returning, again, we're using the backtick quotations, and we're saying greeting with this like $sign and the curly braces. I'm extremely pleased you could join us, first name, last name. So if we just console.log and we call greet on Ahoy and Emir Karabeg, on the bottom, you can see when we run this code, it's gonna say, Ahoy, I'm extremely pleased you could join us, Emir Karabeg, exclamation mark. Obviously, the user is gonna be very excited when they see this thing, and your client's gonna be happy that you just developed this whole function for them. And they're gonna be like, wow, great job. Now everyone is gonna be super stoked when they come to our website. So this is just a use of a function that you can basically reuse code as many times as you want instead of like hard coding a greeting every single time. And we can also pass in parameters to it and manipulate like a bunch of parameters inside of functions, and you'll have functions out of functions. You'll get into like really cool stuff when you're building websites, which we'll all talk about very soon. But does anyone have any questions on this? No. Okay, cool. Demo time. Okay, so for this demo, if you guys want, you guys can actually follow along with me. I'm going to be showing you guys just like everything that we just talked about put together. And we're going to do something cool and like display it on our website. So if you guys want, you can follow along with me. If not, just sit back, relax, and like, if you're super smart, you don't have to, I guess. But if you want to for fun, I encourage you to. Okay. Cool. All right. So let's get started with some kind of HTML file. We're going to say some doc type. We're going to say HTML. Inside of this, we're going to say head, body, and let's give it some title. Let's say the title of this is, what do we do here? Oh, right. Title of this is going to be like, where am I from? And then in the body, we're going to include some h1 tag, and we're going to say inspect to show cool things. Awesome. So we're going to save this. We're going to go to a browser. If you guys have Chrome, open it up. If you guys have another browser, I'm sure every browser has like some kind of interpreter. I like to use like Chrome just because of like Chromium, but you guys can use, I think, whatever you want. Not entirely sure. I'm gonna open up a window. I'm gonna put my lecture 4. Oops, sorry. Okay, cool. So now I just wrote this HTML code. Let's put it side by side. You see this? Okay, awesome. Now I'm gonna write some JavaScript to interact and display something in the terminal. So let's start a new file. We're gonna call this, let's say location, and we're gonna give it the .js to let our machine know that we're working with a JavaScript file. So I'm gonna save this file. And then we're going to start it off with some function. So we're going to say function print home. And inside of this function, we're going to print where someone's from. So let's pass in a city, state, and country. And then let's return. Actually, let's do a suggestion that you mentioned. Instead of returning, let's just console.log straight from the print home function, just to show you guys you don't have to return a value. You can console.log straight after you call some function. Just to note too, in later functions, this is going to be very important because when you're testing out certain functions, placing like smart console.logs and letting your console know where your variable is and like what's happening to it at certain times is super important. So console.log is like your best friend, and interacting with the terminal is your also best friend. So like getting familiar with this concept is also like super important. So let's just console.log straight from this function because we had that suggestion. So let's console.log I am from, and we're using the backtick quotations. You can find this on like the top left side of your keyboard. The reason we're doing this is because we're doing this cool little JavaScript syntax here. So we're saying I am from city. Let's say state and country. Put an exclamation mark. Cool. Can you guys see this? Okay. Now we're going to initialize some variable city. So type in some city, like where you guys are from. I don't know. I'm going to do Newport Beach, because that's where I'm from. I'm going to do state equals California, and my country, USA. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is normally if print home returns some value, I would console.log and I would call print home and pass in some values, and it would automatically console.log it for me. However, because we're console.logging straight in print home, then we don't have to even call console.log. We can just call print home. So let's call print home. And let's pass in city, state, and country. And then when we run this code, you guys don't have to do this with me right now, but just to show you guys, it'll say, I'm from Newport Beach, California, USA. Now let me show what this is going to look like in your Chrome browser. So then go to your website, right click on it, click inspect. Let's move this over just so you guys can see it. Oops. Console. Okay. If I look at my console, I should see something printing here because I already updated my JavaScript and I have a website. But why isn't anything showing up? As a hint, I'll pop up my HTML code. Why, when I look at my website and I click on console, is nothing showing up? Exactly. So the website has no idea that I wrote this JavaScript, right? I just created a new file and wrote some JavaScript in it and I expected it to show up on my website. No, you have to let your website know that it's expecting some JavaScript to be written. So I'm going to add some script tag here. And I'm going to say the source that I want some JavaScript to be included is location.js. And now my website knows, okay, we are expecting some kind of JavaScript to come in because you told us at the end of our body that we included some script tag and the value, like where we're going to look for this JavaScript is in this location called location.js. So now I'm going to save both of these things. I'm going to refresh my website and boom, in my terminal or on my console rather, on my website, it says I'm from Newport Beach, California, USA. Yeah. Yeah. Also, if you guys are ever confused with tags, right? Like some tags, like you might be confused because like it has like, sometimes you don't have this like closing tag, but sometimes you do. So if you're ever confused on like which tags and like which semantics you have to use, just look up MDN web docs. I'll look it up for you guys. Basically, developer.mozilla.com .org has like a really good website for like developers that need to like develop websites. If you ever have any questions or like intricacies on anything, just look here at MDN and they're like a really solid resource for any like questions you have when you're going through programming and like building websites and whatnot. In general too, you can also look at Stack Overflow and see if you guys have like some question. It's definitely going to be answered there already with any like homeworks or projects in the future. And obviously you can also come to us for help if you have any other questions. Are there any questions on anything I covered in lecture as far? Yeah. Oh, the doc type. If I'm like starting a new, I can just like, because I set my file as an HTML file, my VS Code is like pretty smart. And then I'll just open brackets and it'll open it up. Also, if you guys want an extension, there's a bunch of extensions for like web programming. I don't know any off the top of my head, but if you guys look in like on some website, on some any like extensions for like web development, I'm sure there's a bunch out there where VS Code has where you can like automatically set stuff up. But yeah.
Number one extension used by web developers working in HTML is Emir. If you understand how to use Emir and you actually work in its workflow, it's extremely efficient. It's just a little bit of a steep learning curve. But I would recommend Emir for the VS Code extension. But I would definitely have to double check that. But you'll see it.
Is it this one, Drew?
I'll look it up and put it in the other.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. All right, cool. Any other questions on anything I talked about? I know I talked about a lot. Again, recording what we posted, slides we posted. We have the notes as well. The homework, you guys will definitely like understand more about JavaScript. Any other questions? All right, cool. We're gonna take like a 5-minute break until 7:35. And then Joshua is going to teach you some cool stuff about arrays and like JSON objects and some cool stuff you can do in JavaScript that you may or may not have seen before.
Isn't it?
Okay,
We
cool.
ended 8, right?
Sorry.
We ended 8.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Cool. I'm going to open up your file actually, just so like you
Yeah,
have
no
it.
problem. Let's get test.
How long are you gonna be?
I don't.
Or how many slides do you have?
I have like here to like yeah.
Hey, what's up?
Maybe I should like. Is there any way?
I mean, so you'll
Not
come back on Tuesday. I'm just finishing up your lecture.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah.
If I do, yeah, give it the time, then I'll probably just
I only need like
Oh no, you're good. Wait, what's your name?
10 or 15 minutes.
Curtis?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
But that's
You're
only,
good.
like,
Don't worry about it.
Uh,
Okay,
Yeah, yeah, no worries
unless
about
you
it.
wanna
Yeah,
save
yeah,
at the
okay.
end, so let's talk
Yeah,
about it.
it's all good.
I had like, I don't know, if this is everything you wanted? Because I don't know if you want to say.
See, announcements are fine.
Okay.
No, I'm supposed to walk through signing everybody up for get the
Yeah,
sponsor.
right. Okay.
Wait, what?
So
Wait, also, is homework 3 gonna be released?
I didn't see.
Are we
any
gonna release it
scopes.
tomorrow?
yeah, I don't think we'll release it today. We'll release it tomorrow.
Okay, cool. Because I'm still working on the auto grid.
Don't worry about the auto grader. If the homework is fine, just release it. Actually, wait, didn't I do homework 3? Yeah, I did. Just release it. It's fine. The auto grader,
Just double check
it'll be next year's thing. I know you put a lot of work in, but
Okay.
Whoa.
or
You inverted
if you can
your.
get it done by tomorrow night,
Okay.
but otherwise we have to release it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Did you
Did I what? Sorry.
invert your
Just
scrolling?
leave like 10 minutes.
Oh,
so-
yeah.
No,
I
that's
did.
funny. Okay, it's fine.
Yeah, that might be it. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me just make sure I can.
Also, are you gonna do anything to the terminal? Or are you gonna do stuff through Chrome as well?
I probably won't go through Chrome just
Okay.
because like these things don't really need to be.
Yeah, yeah,
I
for
think,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
For sure. Just wondering.
All right,
Cool.
cool. Oh, sorry.
You good?
All right. Let's try to 35. Okay.
Cool.
Like 5 minutes, or I'll try. I can shoot some.
Because like yeah, we'll see. Because like there's still stuff to go through. Okay.
Or if you're okay coming back Tuesday.
I mean
you
yeah,
can
for
finish up Tuesday.
yeah, for sure. I'll just
If there's a
Get-
natural breaking point.
yeah, we'll just try it. Let's see. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Break time is over. And we're going to return to our presentation with built-ins. All right, so we previously, before the break, went over how to write your own JavaScript functions. And, you know, it's all it's cool and all to be able to define your own functions, write code, and do however, whatever you want. But as the nature of functions is, we want to reuse code, right? And so some people have already predefined commonly used functions in JavaScript. And this is really helpful for us because for some things that we may commonly do with the language, we do not want to keep defining functions or like coding it up ourselves every single time that we have to use them. So yeah, these are going to be called built-ins. No need to write them yourself. You can just call them. And there are very, very many. You do not need to know every single built-in. Very helpful resource that was mentioned previously, MDN. You can look up a lot of built-in functions or methods for different variable types and stuff like that in order to be able to use or make use and make your code more efficient. And so here's an example of a built-in, and this is for strings in JavaScript. So we have sentence as a variable, has some strange casing on it, and we wish to standardize it. We are to lowercase the entire string. And so very simple way to do this without having to loop over the string, have to change each character ourselves, is to simply call the method to lowercase on our string. And so you can see that through the console.log, when we call sentence.toLowercase, here our terminal gives out this string all lowercase as expected. And so in the interest of time, we can probably come back to demos if we have time at the end, but there are very, very many more built-ins that are in JavaScript. All right. Next, we can cover data types. And so when working with functions and variables, it's often very useful to be able to know what data type they are. And so we've already established 3 data types before: the number, the string, and Boolean. And there just are a whole plethora of variable types in JavaScript. And sometimes it can be very confusing to keep track of them all. Or if your project scales up very big, information is being passed around through functions, through a lot of different scripts, and you want to know what exactly some information, what data type it is. And so a good way to make sure that you have the correct data type is to be calling the function type of on it. And so here we have defined 2 variables, one called num, which is a number, and one called str, which is a string. And we call type of on both of them. And so as expected, we see in our terminal, the first one's a number, the second one's a string. And as a third case, we see that if we just define a variable, but we do not assign it any value, the type of the variable will be undefined. And that kind of makes sense because we haven't assigned anything to it. There's no data type associated with it as of its initialization. All right. And this is very helpful for, once again, double checking what data type you have. And because some methods or some functions require certain types of data to be input to it, this can help clarify, make your life easier when you're going through your code. All right. Next, we'll talk about objects. And so what are objects in JavaScript? Objects are a collection of data. And so this is also a data type, but it's essentially like a container for more data. And so sometimes you want to consolidate lots of different data into a single variable. And an example of this could be when we are trying to define a student. And a student has a bunch of different information associated with them, perhaps their student ID, their name, their age, their grade. And if we want all of this information to be consolidated in a nice place, which we can assign to their student names or student variable, we can put this into an object. And so if anyone's familiar with Python as a previous programming language, you can see that they are similar to dictionaries in Python. And this means that there are key value pairs to access data. And this will be a little more clear in our next slide's example, what these key value pairs are. And to declare them, we initialize them with curly braces. So here we have an example of how to define an object in JavaScript. And so here we have a person, and we see that we initialize it with these curly braces here to sort of encapsulate all the information we want inside this person. So we have different keys, which are like the parameters of this person. So there's like a name, city, state, favorite food, etc. And we assign to these keys their values with this colon. And so these key value pairs are associated with each other with this colon. And so we see the name is Josh Hug from Austin, Texas, and so on and so forth. And you can, and finally, we see that these are in a comma separated list. So nothing too special there. We just separate each parameter with a comma so that we know when to break. And so it's also noted that we can have many different variable types stored within this object, right? The first three are strings, or sorry, the first four are strings, but we also have a Boolean variable stored here and an integer at the very end. And so this object can store many different types of data, and it just consolidates it all into one variable. And so here we see that if we console.log our object, we see it in our terminal as a very similar structure. And to reference the data, we want to be able to, once we define the person, we want to be able to get the data back, right? We don't want it to be locked in there forever, and we can do this by making use of our keys. So I guess the first key that we have here is the name. And so if we want to access the name of this person, there are two different ways that are equivalent to being able to access this information. We can use the dot notation, or we can use bracket notation. And the first one is dot notation. We can see in this console.log, which is corresponding to this first Josh Hug up here. Essentially, you just do dot the key value, I guess, or key in the person, and it will return the value associated with that key. And second, you can also use bracket notation. And note this time, when you use bracket notation, you have to pass in a string, which is a key for the object. And these two are equivalent. I guess we could do a demo on some more properties of objects. Okay. And so, as before, Emir had his JavaScript running on an HTML file. You can actually just run JavaScript plain in a JS file into your terminal. And that's what I'm going to do here. Okay. So let us define this object, which we call dog. And so this dog has a name, and it also has a function within it. And so this is different, right? We haven't really seen that many different types of data types that can be stored in objects, but even objects can store functions as part of their keys. And so when we run this file, we expect dog.speak to call this function. And run it, we can just do this. And as it calls this function, we see the console.log woof woof as expected. And yeah. One last, I guess, example. We define Okay, we define another object called me, which is actually, if you notice, if you look a little closer, the keys correspond to values that are other objects. And so we can see that objects can be nested. And so when we call console.log me.name, what do we expect? We expect it to return another object itself. And so we save the file, run it, and we see that the console will return the object associated with the name. And I think you can even reference into this return object and see that you get your first name from this name. So yeah, objects are pretty powerful in JavaScript. Are there, yes? Right, so like you mean like defining an empty object?
Yeah, like a generic person that would like have a name attribute, like last name attribute, all that stuff.
Like a class. Are you like trying to, I'm not sure if you were referencing like a class, if you know that from like Java,
Yeah.
I guess. I think that'd be a separate thing. These objects are like variables in themselves. That makes sense.
Okay.
And you can actually, I think you can initialize an empty object and then add keys to it if that. So these objects aren't just static. You can actually change the values within them, if that makes sense. So you can actually edit them as well and add keys and values to them.
It's odd because like you create this general object like person, and then but you have to do all that stuff every single time you want to make a new person. Like you can't build out the structure of like a generic person object. Like you want to type all of that for every single person you want to make.
I suppose you could write a function, I guess. Yeah. I mean, you could write a function to return like objects.
I guess.
Yeah. I mean, this is just for an example, I guess. Normally, you wouldn't be writing functions in this sort of like inefficient manner. But this is to like try and give you a good example of how objects work and like what exactly you can store in them and how to reference their data.
We'll get into more of what you're talking about when it gets to like the React stuff. That's like if you want to like reuse big chunks of code in React to like multiple components. But this is basically just for like if you have like one, if you want to store like one dictionary of things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, moving on to JSONs. Okay, so we just talked about JavaScript objects, and now in a similar fashion, we can see that JavaScript object notations also tend to consolidate or store data. But in this case, they are not specific to just JavaScript. Even though they have JavaScript in their name, lots of different languages can read and manipulate JSONs as well. And so this is, their universality is very helpful for sharing and sending data. So a good example of how this is used is if you want us to send data to a server or get data from a server. If you want to have your website pull information from like a social media profile, you might want to query and get a JSON back from a server that will contain a lot of your information. And so very big distinction is that they're not the same as a JavaScript object, even though they might look very similar. And we can see that an example of a JSON here. And what's cool about JSONs is that in JavaScript, you can convert between JavaScript objects and JSONs pretty easily. And so here we have my object, which is a JavaScript object, which we defined with some generic keys and values. And we try to convert this to a JSON. And through this, we can use the built-in method json.stringify my object and store this into my JSON. If we console.log it, we see that it looks very, very similar to the object itself, except you may notice that the keys are a little bit different. And what's different about these keys is that they're all strings. And in JSONs, all their keys are necessitated to be strings. And this is a property of JSONs only. JavaScript objects do not need to have their keys be strings. And this is like one of the differences between the two. And we can see that in true nature, if we're sending data, we can also receive data. So being able to convert between a JSON and a JavaScript object is also very useful. And we can do this with the method json.parse. Here we have a JSON string. And upon calling json.parse on my JSON, we get an object. And yeah, console.logging this object will give us what we expect. This is essentially what we have defined previously in the previous slide. Yeah. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, cool. All right, moving away from the topic of data consolidation, we now have arrow functions. And this is just another cool feature of JavaScript. I don't think all languages support arrow functions, but essentially what arrow functions do is that they are shorthand methods of defining functions. Their baseline or their outline of how to define an arrow function is you have your open parentheses, you put your arguments within them, and then you have the arrow, which is equals to caret. And within your curly braces, you have your function code. And of course, you assign this to some function name. And an example of this in more concrete terms, we can see that add nums, we want to be our function. And so we assign this with our equal sign. And here's where the arrow function notation comes in. We see our parentheses here with our arguments, n1 and n2, or two numbers. And then we see an arrow. And within these curly braces, we basically do whatever we want to do in the function. And in this case, all it does is return the summation of the two numbers. Yeah, console.logging, calling this function will return 7 as we expect. 3 plus 4 is 7. Another way to define this simple function is also we can actually leave out the curly braces. This is only if we want to directly return something. If we want to do some more finagling with our code within the function body, we probably cannot just put the arrow and then our return value, because otherwise the function will not know what exactly to return. But here we see that we have our parentheses with our two parameters, and after this arrow, we just return straight n1 plus n2. And so console.logging out this function again yields the same number. And so, yeah, nice way to write your functions if you're feeling fancy. Yes, you have a question? Yeah, pretty much. If you don't want to, like normally your functions probably will not be so simple. If you only want to return like right away, basically with your parameters, like you're doing something very simple, like we're adding them here straight up. If you want to do something like that simple, I think it's completely fine to leave out the curly braces. But once your function becomes larger, you're going to have to do more things. You're going to want to have the function body be enclosed in these curly braces. Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know if I didn't get it, but what's the difference between the arrow function and the functions that was introduced?
Right. Okay. There is no difference. I suppose if I go back here, arrow functions are just a new, different type of way to define functions, right? They're the same concept in JavaScript. We just, I guess, there's shorthand method of defining functions. Sometimes you want to clean up your code, make it a little easier to read. This is how you can do it. And so you don't have to do this by any means, but it's just a different way of being able to define your functions. Okay. Wait. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Finally, we have arrays. And so we've been looking at unstructured groups of data with JSON objects, JSONs, and now we want to see what happens if we can order them. And so arrays are basically an ordered collection of data. And they can store any data type. They don't have to be the same. It's pretty cool that way, just like objects. And they're declared with square brackets, which we can see in the following slides example. In this case, the key value pairs are a little bit more restricted. You actually have to reference data by their index. So once again, this goes by the ordered collection of data, and we zero index our arrays. So that means that the first element in the array will be indexed with 0. Okay. And so here's an example of defining an array. We have the days of the week, which we define to be, we see that we declare the array with these square brackets this time. And in a comma separated list, we put everything we want into the array. And so this is pretty simple. If we console.log out the days of the week, we see the array in our terminal as expected. But if we want to index the individual elements into or of this array, we can use we can index using these square brackets as well. And within these square brackets, we put in the index of what data we want to get. So for example, if we index 0, which I mentioned would be the first element, we get Monday. The second element is 1, which is Tuesday. And 6 should be the last element because there are 7 days. And that should be Sunday. And yeah. Are there any questions on arrays? Okay. And the cool thing about arrays is that they support the spread operator. I think other things do too, but basically, this makes it easy to make shallow copies of arrays. If anyone's familiar with programming, sometimes making copies of arrays can be annoying. You might have to do a for loop or loop over the elements of the array. The spread operator makes it easy for us, and it's denoted with a triple dot or dot dot dot. We'll see in this example. To be able to spread an array basically means that we want to copy all of its elements, and typically we can do this into another array. So first we define our first array as fruits. We have apple, orange, and banana. And if we want to define another array with the same elements as fruits, one method could be to loop over all the elements in fruits and then add them to our array, but that seems to be a little bit clunky. We want to have our code be more concise, more readable. And so we use the spread operator, which is these triple dots in front of this first array. And doing so basically copies everything in the array in fruits into another fruits. And then after that, we can actually also add anything else we want into this array. So we have papaya and console.logging both of them. We see that the original array is what we expect, but then the second array actually has all 3 of the initial fruits plus the last one, which is papaya. And so, yeah, okay. Any questions on that? Okay. Then this is the end of the content for the lecture. Couple announcements. Your homework 2 or your CSS homework is due tomorrow at 11:59. And we just released project 1, which is a personal website, and that'll be due next Thursday, February 24th.
We're also releasing homework 3 tomorrow. And just real quick before you guys go, we're gonna have Drew set up your Google Classroom because we're getting like a lot of questions about like the grade scope, like submissions and stuff. So like it's just gonna take like 2 quick minutes. Let me stop sharing also so I can give you all